Welcome to another bonus episode of the PFF College Football Show. Max Chadwick alongside Dalton Wassman, and we are only 3 weeks away from Conference Championship Saturday, and only 4 weeks away, Dalton, from the College Football Playoff race. I cannot wait for it, obviously. And Dalton, what we wanted to do here, and what we might do for the rest of the season until we get to Selection Sunday, is kind of just give an update on who controls their own destiny in the College Football Playoff race right now. Obviously, a 12-team playoff, the first ever 12-team playoff that we have. But there's still, with 3 weeks remaining in the regular season, there's still like 17 teams that we feasibly think basically control their own destiny in the College Football Playoff race.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, I think there's right around 30 teams still alive. I was going through this before the show, and I think if you can still win your conference, you're still at least alive. You have a pulse, and that's especially true in the SEC. But this being in this group, that if you just go, okay, win the rest of our games, and we don't have to worry about anything else, that's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
And I think what you have is teams that you start to feel the pressure though week to week, right?
Yes.
You feel that pressure, and I think we've seen it from some teams playing some closer games lately and getting in some battles, and it gets into November football, and you really start to talk about they get harder. Even if you're undefeated, they get harder and harder every single week.
Absolutely. So, yeah, these aren't like I said, there's like 30 teams still alive for the College Football Playoff, but these are the teams that basically just went out and you're fine. That's what we're trying to say right here. So, let's start off with our first grouping of teams right there. That is basically the category of basically don't fuck it up. That's the category for it right now. Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Alabama, and Ole Miss. And Dalton, just looking at those schools right there, there are some schools like Oregon that can probably afford to lose a game and still make the College Football Playoff. There are other schools like Penn State, Alabama, and Ole Miss that can't afford a loss, but the reason why they're in this grouping, they all have really easy schedules the rest of the way. In fact, Penn State, Alabama, and Ole Miss, none of them play a top 40 team in the country according to PFF's power rankings the rest of the regular season. Ohio State, you're looking at them, could probably afford to lose to Indiana and still get in because they obviously beat Penn State as well and have a close loss to Oregon. But they obviously must beat Northwestern and Michigan as well. So these are basically the schools that are all but guaranteed a spot in the College Football Playoff as long as they don't mess it up.
Yeah, so I think let's go through each of the five real quick. Oregon's the most stone cold lock.
Yes,
I think,
number one in the country.
No question. Yeah. They could even lose in an upset in one of their last two games, and they're still getting in. They're still going to play in the Big Ten title game, and they're going to have a chance.
And if they lose that, they'll go 11-2 and still probably get it.
And they'll be the 5 seed.
Yeah.
I mean, realistic. That's what they're going to be. Is they'll be the 5 seed. Oregon's the stone cold lock. Ohio State, I think even if they lose to Indiana, as long as they beat Michigan, I think they would have to be 9-3 to be in danger.
Yes.
If you think about even if their two losses were to Oregon and Indiana, and those two teams are playing in the Big Ten title game, so be it. I think Ohio State, if I was given a percentage off the top of my head, it's still 90% they're getting in, right? Penn State, I'm worried about if they lose.
They're not getting in.
I think a 10-2 resume, they're not getting in on 10-2, especially if one of their losses is to say Minnesota or something like that. I don't think Penn State has the type of high quality win that some of these other teams have.
They play Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland.
They haven't even played another team that's currently in the top 25. Penn State at 11-1. They went through the Big Ten. They're 11-1. I think it's very much the same.
They lost by 7 to Ohio State.
And you'll go, okay, we're pretty sure they're one of the 12 best teams in the country, right? Their defense is great. At times, their offense has been really good. It runs a little hot and cold at times. Penn State, I would be worried about. Alabama's the interesting one to me because I think they have a much easier path to the SEC title game than I realized because there's so many teams bunched up with 1 or 2 losses in the SEC. Obviously, the one-loss teams are Texas and A&M and Tennessee, okay? But Texas and A&M are playing each other, right, at the end of the year. And the scenario for Alabama is simple. They win their last 2 games, and Georgia beats Tennessee. Alabama's going to the SEC title game. They're the one other team with a very simple scenario, and everybody else, like LSU and Missouri and all the other teams, they have some weird tiebreaker stuff that needs to happen. Essentially, starting with they need Bama to lose to Auburn, or I think it's Mississippi State they're playing also. Or no, it's Oklahoma, sorry. But either way, they should win the game. I think Bama not only do they have a road to the playoff that's right in front of them, they have a road to a top 4 seed that's right in front of them. Because if Georgia beats Tennessee, then you could end up with Alabama versus the winner of Texas and Texas A&M. And then if Bama wins that game and they finally get their revenge on Quinn Ewers, maybe, you're talking about, okay, they're like the 3 or 4 seed in the playoff, if not higher than that. So Alabama, I think, has the most interesting number of paths of all of these teams. And I think Penn State's the one that can at least afford a loss.
Yeah, I think, Oregon, just to recap, Oregon can basically, as long as they don't lose to both Wisconsin and Washington, they're in the college football playoff. Ohio State, they could probably lose to Indiana, but as long as they beat Northwestern and Michigan, they're in the college football playoff. Penn State's got to beat Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland, which they should be heavily favored in all 3 of those games to make the college football playoff. Alabama, all they got to do is just beat Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn and get into the college football playoff. And Ole Miss, they got to beat Florida and Mississippi State to make the college football playoff. So, again, this is why they're in the don't screw it up bracket, because it's pretty relatively easy rest of the way.
Ole Miss, though, I know they dominated Georgia, but I'm not sure their case is as rock solid. I think we have to remember, too, there's some people looking at their loss to Kentucky, a 3-6 team Kentucky, that if there is a spoiler sitting out here, like a Colorado, and say maybe the Big 12 gets 2 teams, if there's some sort of spoiler, Ole Miss could be a victim of it. I don't know that they're 100% locked in if they win these next 2 games. I think it would help them a lot to go out and take care of business and win both games by 40. That would help, because I think them at 10-2, they're not quite as rock solid as Alabama at 10-2.
Yeah, but I think if they go 10-2 and say Georgia goes 10-2, they're going to put them in over Georgia.
Probably, yes.
Yeah, so that's why it's like I feel really, as long as they beat Florida and Mississippi State, I feel good about them. All right, let's go into a next bracket, Dawn, that I have. Basically, the schools that maybe can survive with another loss. We got Texas, Indiana, BYU, and Tennessee. So Texas is one of only 2 SEC teams with a loss, obviously the other one being Tennessee. But right now, the Longhorns' resume isn't as strong as others that you might think of right now. Even though they're number 3 in the country, their best win is a 3-point victory over a 6-4 Vanderbilt team. So if they lose to Texas A&M, what's the marquee win for Texas at 10-2? That's going to be a very interesting dilemma. They might still get in at 10-2, but who knows? Tennessee obviously lost to Arkansas, not a great loss, and obviously Texas is a better loss than they do, losing to Georgia. But they do have a very good win over Alabama. So if they lose to Georgia, say this weekend, they could still say, hey, we beat Alabama and we're 10-2, so we deserve to be in the college football playoff. Indiana and BYU are interesting to me, Dalton, because Indiana, obviously, both those schools are undefeated right now. But the argument against Indiana, a lot of people have been saying, is, well, they haven't played anyone yet, right? And if they lose to Ohio State and they beat Purdue to close out the year, then the argument is, okay, they're 11-1, yes, but they didn't beat anyone this year. So that's kind of a tough, that's going to be an interesting argument against Indiana. And then BYU, I'm worried about them. Dalton, they're 9-0 right now, but they're only number 6 in the country. It feels like if they screw up at any point the rest of the year, they might hurt, the committee might punish them for it. It seems like they're kind of looking for a reason to bump BYU out of this right now, even though you and I would both agree they should not be in that situation. But listen, they beat SMU, they beat Kansas State, who are 2 of the top 20 teams in the country. So I'm worried about BYU, say if they slip up in one of these games, and if they don't win the Big 12, the committee might punish them for it.
So here's what I think with BYU. I think now I disagree with this line of thinking, but
same.
I think what's going to happen is they at least finish 12-0. Okay, and if they run the table in the regular season,
they're in.
I think they're a lock. And then what every other team in this race is afraid of is Colorado winning, spoiling it, and the Big 12 getting 2. Because I think if BYU finishes 12-1 and their one loss is Colorado in the conference title game, they should be a lock to make it.
Because then the argument is, if you're BYU, why would you? I get you want the first round bye, but why would you play in the conference title game if you're automatically guaranteed? And now if you play the game and lose, you're getting bumped out. It's not fair, honestly. Either,
no,
right?
It's not fair at all. They will have taken care of business. You mentioned 2 top 20 wins. There's another big game against Arizona State.
Right.
That's a 7-2 team currently. That's a good win. We've seen them. Look, they went on the road and beat Utah. I think BYU I'll feel better about their case. Now, to me, even if they win 11, they should be in.
Yeah.
The strength of record, according to ESPN, is second in the country right now behind Oregon. You mentioned the SMU win. That was on the road, too.
Yes.
The Kansas State. They didn't just beat Kansas State. They beat the crap out of Kansas State. They beat them by 29. So I think BYU's got a near lock case right now, but I think the line of thinking is going to be they need to at least go 12-0. And if they end up 12-1, they should still get in. Okay, get to 12 wins one way or the other. And I'm not saying it's fair.
If they're 11-2, I don't think they're getting.
I don't think they're gonna, because their problem is, especially this week's a big week. Because look, for as dangerous as I'm saying Kansas is, and they are, I've said it.
You pick Kansas,
I'm very worried about this game because Kansas is better than their record. But people are going to look at it and go, Kansas is a 4 or 5 win team, and you lost to them, which is my line of thinking for Ole Miss with Kentucky. But the SEC is the SEC. BYU, I think, went out in the regular season.
They're in.
You're in. There's no reason. It would be a travesty if they were 12-1 and got knocked out.
Yeah.
Indiana, I get the strength of schedule thing. I'm a little tired of strength of schedule in college football because some of these schedules are made 10 years ahead of time, and I'm not really about it. So it's not Kurt Signetti's fault.
No, but
it's not any of the players' fault. I understand what's in front of you is what's in front of you. But
it's a Texas argument, though, too.
But what's in front of them, except for the Michigan game, they have absolutely steamrolled every single week. And their defense proved to me in that Michigan game they can play that kind of game. Now, I think Indiana, we all know, it's going to come down to perception, right? If they go into Ohio State and lose by 40, which I don't think they will, then people are going to go, well, they can't play with the big boys.
Yeah.
Okay, and at least there's one bit of proof right now. I don't think that's going to happen. I actually really think it's going to be a really good competitive game. I do. I think Indiana is one of the best teams in the country. I think they've shown that, just dominating everybody, right? I think all the numbers and the performance says they're one of the best teams in the country, but it is going to come down. Now, we also have a scenario with Indiana where if they find a way to win that game, then they get to play Oregon. And if they were to ever beat Oregon, they'd be the number one team in the country going into the playoffs. So I think there's a wide range of outcomes. I think you just have to – I'm so sick of this thing with the strength of schedule, though. And I get it. If you play
that's how you
you play a super easy – like Liberty last year and it's the easiest schedule in the country, you CUSA, fine. But Indiana has dominated. It's almost everybody. They played one bad half of football all season.
That's the thing that that's what we have to judge these teams off of, though. It's not like the NFL. I get you get sick of that, but that's what we're ultimately talking. That's why we're talking about Texas in the first place.
But if you take that schedule and you win by 30 every week.
No, I know. I get it.
Then cool.
I get it. No, I know. But there is an argument. If they do get blown out by Ohio State, I would understand the argument for saying, hey.
I personally, I just don't think they're going to.
Yeah, no.
If it
does happen,
I don't think they're going to get blown out.
If it does happen, then that. So, do you agree with these 4 being in this grouping here, where that maybe they could afford a loss, maybe, but we don't know.
I don't know that Texas can.
Yeah, but knowing the committee though.
Oh, you can know them all they want. I'm just saying, if they lose to A&M and
in our opinion, if we were the committee, BYU would be in the first grouping for us because we would say just don't screw it up. Because in our opinion, what they've done is good enough to be there. But with knowing the committee and the fact that number 6 right now, that's why I have them that group.
My big problem with Texas, it is entirely possible if they lose to A&M and they're 10-2, that their best win on the year is over a Vandy team by 3 who could be 6-6 at the end of it.
Yeah.
I know that's tough. That's a problem.
I know that's tough.
They would be a team rooting for Colorado to lose, or another spoiler to lose. Because I don't think Texas and Ole Miss are quite as safe as you might think they are. Now Texas gets to 11-1. First of all, that'll get them in the conference title game. They could win the SEC. Second, I think at 11-1, fine, you can have it. You beat A&M, you're 11-1.
Even if they lose in the SEC title game, I think whoever makes the SEC title game is guaranteed to be in, no matter what.
Yeah, both teams. Yeah, absolutely.
But Ole Miss, I think Ole Miss all got to do is win out. I think if they win out, they're fine. I really don't think there's too much of a discussion there. Let's go to the other teams, Dawn, that are basically just win out in the regular season. So basically, these teams have to win out in the regular season. But if they do that, it doesn't really matter if they win the conference or not. And let's get to those 3 teams right now. Notre Dame, Georgia, and Texas A&M. Notre Dame obviously does not play in a conference, so they have to win out in the regular season, and they have a bad loss, obviously, to Northern Illinois as well. But if they beat Virginia, they beat number 24 Army, who we'll talk about in a little bit, and beat USC, they'll be 11-1. They'll get in. Georgia right now, 7-2 on the year. Georgia still plays Tennessee this Saturday, also plays Georgia Tech, who's a solid team at the end of the year as well. If Georgia goes 10-2, they're going to get into the college football playoff. If Texas A&M goes 10-2, which means that they would beat Texas, if they win out, they'll get in as well. So obviously Georgia and A&M are currently on the outside looking in, but it's safe to say if both those schools win out in the regular season, both of them make the college football playoff. And I think you and I would both agree if Notre Dame wins out and goes 11-1, they're going to be in the college football playoff as well.
Yeah, I agree. Notre Dame, it's a very clear cutoff there. Look, if they win their last few games, they'll overcome that one loss. And they've been dominant in a lot of their wins lately. Not the hardest schedule in the world, but the A&M win at the beginning of the year looks better. Obviously, the NIU loss is a bad one. If they lose the second game, it's a serious problem, and they don't have the conference title game to lean on. A&M's an interesting case, I think. There's still a scenario, well, if they win out, they're in the SEC title game. Mm-hmm. And I think, look, they have a shot to win the SEC, obviously, if you get there. So they could find themselves in the top 4 at the end of it all. But if they do lose to Texas, there's not a 3-loss case here for them.
No, I agree. Yeah.
Because I think especially
they got blown out by South Carolina.
Got blown out,
and they lost convincingly to Notre Dame.
Yeah, and their good wins are LSU and Missouri. And those two teams are not quite as well-rounded as we think. They're both in the top 25, but just barely, right? And I don't think we think either of them is getting to the playoff at this point. Missouri would take something beyond a miracle. But A&M at 3 losses, I agree. Georgia's going to be the 3-loss case that they still make a case for because their losses will have been, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Tennessee probably.
Tennessee.
Tennessee would probably be the third. If they lose to Georgia Tech at the end of the year.
But Georgia beat Texas and Clemson, too, which is that's the tough. But I don't think they should get in at 3 losses. I agree. But that I could see there being a world where that being an argument.
They're on the bubble. They need spoilers not to happen.
Yeah.
Something like Colorado or 2 group of 5s getting in somehow or something like that. But I also think, are we really riding this Clemson win?
I don't know.
Is this what we're doing? When they didn't play great for the first.
They're a top 25 team, I think. I don't think they're more than that.
I mean, I don't know that at the end of the year that Clemson will even be ranked. And Clemson's beaten nobody. So it's kind of when you're doing who beat who. I think we're riding this Clemson win a little too much. Because it just Clemson, what do we know about Clemson right now? They're good enough to beat bad teams.
Yeah.
So I don't think that win's as impressive as everybody. That's not the same old Clemson it's been. And I say that knowing they still, in theory, have a shot to win the ACC. And I guess Georgia, that's what they would be rooting for is for Clemson to go as far as they possibly could. But I'm not getting it there. And even honestly, the win at Texas, I know they were clearly the better team in that game. What has Texas done?
Yeah.
I think putting a team in on the basis of their losses, well, let's be real. For 3 quarters, they got dominated by Alabama, and they got dominated by Ole Miss beyond the first 2 drives. I mean, I don't think a 9-3 Georgia. I don't think they should get in unless we see a lot of other chaos.
Do you agree though? Even if Georgia and A&M make the SEC title game and lose and go 10-3 on the year, that they both will get in still?
Yeah, I'm in on that.
Yeah, okay. So do you agree that these are 3? If they win out in the regular season alone, they'll be in the college football playoff?
Because that loss. I'm trying to think about the weird part of that. Who would they be playing? If A&M makes it, they'd be playing, I think, either Tennessee or Alabama in all likelihood.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if Georgia beats Tennessee, it could be Alabama. Yes.
I just think whoever makes the SEC title game is going to get in. If win or lose.
Yeah, that's probably true. And there's still some weird tiebreakers to go through, and there's even a chance that I think I read somebody was saying there's actually a not that crazy chance that LSU could still make it, which would be really interesting because if they lost that game, they'd be sitting at 4 losses and it'd be a whole different mess. But I think among that group of teams, I think you're right.
Okay, let's finish out with the teams that simply, Dalton, they got to just win out, which means win out in their regular season and win their respective conference championship game. We got Miami, Boise State, SMU, Colorado, and Army in that grouping. So Miami and SMU you could put together because they're both in the ACC. I don't think either of them have the resumes to get in with 2 losses if they lose in the ACC title game. So winning the conference is basically a must. And also for the simple fact of if either of them lose in the regular season, a school like Clemson could overtake them in the ACC title game. So Miami especially, if they lose a game, Clemson will overtake them in the standings. So they got to be very careful there. So that's why I think Miami and SMU both got to win out and win the ACC championship game in order to get to the college football playoff. Colorado's kind of in the same boat as those 2 schools, where Colorado currently at 7-2 right now. They have to win out, go 10-2, and win the Big 12 championship, because I don't think a 10-3 record with a loss to BYU in the title game will get in. And also, if Colorado loses in the regular season, they're most likely going to lose their spot in the conference title game as well. And then, Dalton, the really interesting argument we have here is Boise State and Army. So Boise State right now is number 13 in the country. They're 8-1 in the season. And if they win out and win the Mountain West, they are most certainly getting into the college football playoff, because their only loss was by 3 points to the team we just talked about before in Oregon, the number 1 team in America. Army is one of 4 undefeated teams left at 9-0 on the season. And next weekend, they play Notre Dame, a top 10 team in the country. If Army wins that game, if they beat Notre Dame, and then they win the American Athletic Championship game against probably Tulane, who will be a top 25 team in the country at that time as well, I think a 13-0 Army with a win over Notre Dame and another top 25 win over Tulane, it's almost impossible to leave Army out at 13-0 in that. So that's kind of the schools. Army's an interesting case, but I think those are the schools that can feel really good about their chances if they just simply win the remaining games.
Yeah, Army's another one with a strength of schedule issue so far this season, but we will find out. We're going to find out about them. If they lose to Notre Dame, you still have a chance to make it, but they need Boise to lose and some other things, and they still have to go through Tulane, who's blazing hot right now. I think another team in that mix right there. Maybe not in that mix, but from, they still need Boise to lose, but we need to not forget about Tulane in here, because they're raging hot. They get to play Navy and Memphis and Army, and they just got ranked number 25 in the country.
But they don't control their own destiny right now.
They don't, but they're not that far from doing it. If I think either way, a Boise loss is what it would take.
Yes.
But I think Colorado's the easiest one here. You either win the Big 12 or you don't.
Yes.
It's that simple. There is no at-large case, I think, in any way, shape, or form with another loss where Colorado can get in. Mm-hmm. That's the easy one. The more intriguing thing in the Big 12 is what happens with BYU in that scenario, or what happens with BYU really in their last 3 or even 4 games. Okay. The ACC feels like the most disrespected conference of all of them, doesn't it? I mean, with SMU sitting at 14, I think it is, and they've got a pretty darn good resume. Their one loss to BYU by 3 points early in the season, when honestly SMU didn't even know who their starting quarterback was. They were still trying to figure that out. But it does feel like that's the road we're going down. Is SMU and Miami is going to be a de facto playoff game. Assuming we get there, we should get there. What is it? Miami plays Wake Forest and Syracuse.
Yeah, SMU's got Boston College, Virginia, and Cal.
All competitive games. But and I think that's one thing we have to remember in this whole process. We are going to get 4, 5, 6 upsets in these last 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to get, Tennessee plays Vandy at the end of the year. SMU, all 3 of those teams are competitive teams, right? Even Georgia playing Georgia Tech. You know what? We've seen it with Georgia Tech already once this year, right? I mean, and Georgia, they've been when you struggle to score, you keep a lot of other teams in ball games. I think you're still talking about a lot of scenarios. Look, I think Penn State even. Don't go to Minnesota and mess around.
Yeah.
These are the things that can happen. But I think that group, the group of 5 thing is interesting to me with the American, but I think that group, I feel for the ACC, because those are 2 really good football teams. And I think you could make an argument that SMU should be top 12 right now, but this is what's going to happen in the world where they're going to just lean towards SEC Big Ten for most of the field. And I'll tell you the other thing too. Every other team on this table is rooting for Notre Dame to lose a game. Every single one of them.
Yeah,
that's a spot that is so there. Every team at this table is rooting for Notre Dame to lose, and they're rooting for Colorado to lose.
Yeah,
those are the 2 teams that essentially, when you talk about from the other Big 4 conferences, those are the 2 big bid stealers.
If they lose to Army, though, don't you think that kind of opens up the door for Army to steal a bid then?
I think they would take their chances with that, because Army then still has to beat Tulane, who's really good. And Army, I think there's still some chance there that they may not put them in undefeated.
That'd be bad. That'd be really bad.
It would be a rough look.
That'd be
to be 13.
really bad
if they were 13-0, it would be a rough look.
The win over Notre Dame.
They might even make them the first team out. I'm serious.
That would suck.
It would be a rough look. But I think there's a lot of teams here rooting for Army to beat Notre Dame.
Yeah, and the ACC argument, I mean, you look at the resumes. I mean, SMU, yes, losing to BYU is a great loss now, but their best win is over Louisville, and then maybe Pitt is the next best win for them, and they don't really have that difficult schedule remaining either, so I think they have to win out and go 12-1 to make the college football playoff. And Miami, kind of the same thing, too. I don't think Miami could survive a second loss anywhere, honestly. So, yeah, I think that's – listen, this board's going to update. We're going to maybe do this every single week before the playoff. We're going to update this desk, obviously, every single week. It's going to change a lot as the weeks go on. But this is kind of just a grouping of the 17 teams that we think currently control their own destiny, essentially, for the college football playoff. Let us know in the comments below what you think about the current playoff race, who should be in, who's on the bubble right now, who controls their own destiny. If anyone on here does not control their own destiny, let us know in the comments below. As well, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. And remember that our Week 12 review show is at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. Make sure you guys stay tuned for that because it'll obviously provide a lot more clarity on the current wide open college football playoff race. But for Dalton Wassman, for our producer Eli back there, I'm Max Chadwick. We'll see you guys very soon. Hey, thanks for watching another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Please make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Also, subscribe to PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for all of the same data and grades that we use in our show, plus fantasy tools, betting tools, and our mock draft simulator.